Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari. This is Great Big History Podcast. Today, we do the collapse of the Roman Republic. So, when we left, we were creating an empire. We were conquering other places. We were making a world economy. We were getting rich. Italy was devastated by the wars of Hannibal. That's true. The Roman citizens were getting burned out from the endless wars they were fighting in Greece, in Africa, in Spain. The Spanish wars were going to be very hard on the Roman soldiery, Roman soldiers. But what destroyed the Roman Republic was income inequality. Ultimately, what ripped the Roman Republic apart was the difference between rich and poor. Now, people will go, oh, whoa, there were always rich people in Rome. That's true. There were. They just weren't that much richer. They lived in Rome. They still needed to be connected to Roman citizens to get them to vote for them. That is going to change after the conquest of Greece, after the conquest of the Middle East, after the conquest of Spain. Because the rich got super rich. Like Bill Gates looks poor kind of rich. War equaled plunder. And the rich got a bigger part of that plunder than the middle classes got. War also equaled millions of slaves that now could work your giant plantations. They didn't have giant plantations before. Rome wasn't rich. Rome was poor. Remember, Rome was weak and dumb. The perfect Rome, even a rich Roman, worked his own farm and had a couple of hirelings. Now, you could have 10,000 slaves on a farm, which meant you needed thousands of acres. And you have the development of plantations, a plantation economy. The rich controlled the trades of Sicilian wheat, of Spanish mines. They made all the profits. And what you got was auctoritas, authority, leadership, but for an increasingly small group of people who could buy off other people. You wanted to get elected consul? That's great. You had to go to one of 5 rich people to get the money, in order to get the bribes, in order to get elected consul. Increasingly, power was centered on a group of super rich, not just rich, but super rich within the Senate. And how much were they going to want to be equals the way Cincinnatus was? Now, Cincinnatus we'll talk about a little bit, I think, but Cincinnatus was upper middle class farmer who, when the Gauls attacked, the Senate went, Cincinnatus, please help us. And Cincinnatus said, okay, I'll do that. They made him dictator. They gave him all the powers of imperium. He could do anything. He gets his army together. He gets that army, goes and marches, defeats the Gauls, comes back, hands over his sword to the Senate, says, I don't want to be king. I'm going back to my farm. Turning swords into plowshares, that's Cincinnatus. George Washington is Cincinnatus. And there are two statues. One's in the Smithsonian. One's in the Library of Congress of George Washington dressed as Cincinnatus. We have a city called Cincinnati. He is the great Republican hero. He didn't want power. He wanted to help the Republic. We are going to see there are no more Cincinnatuses. When given a chance for power, people are increasingly want to take it. Well, what about the middle classes? What about the yeoman farmers, the people who used to work, the soldiers in the army? Well, Hannibal destroyed most of their farms. So it was going to cost them a lot of money to recover. They lost money on the wars. It was going to cost them more money to recover, to rebuild. So when they finally came home after fighting Hannibal, after winning at Zama, fighting in Spain, winning at Zama, they came home to a burned out farm, a destroyed house. All of their pigs, all of their goats, all of their sheep dead, eaten. All of their barns destroyed, ripped apart for the wood. So yeah, in the triumph, the great triumph of Scipio Africanus, they might say they got $20,000, which is a good payment. I would love a bonus of $20,000. I love someone to say, you did a good job, here's 20 grand. That'd be awesome for me. But what if my repairs on my house would cost me 50 grand, 100 grand? That 20 grand doesn't help me. And so this is what happens. Get a knock on the door. It's from my neighbor, a patrician. And it's not him. It's one of his agents. And he's like, oh, Kristoff, looks like your house is all destroyed. It's going to cost you a lot of money to rebuild. I know. What am I going to do? I didn't get enough on the triumph. Kristoff, Dougicus, Dougicus, your local patrician, you know he feels for you. You are an honorable man. You are a good Roman. You fought for Rome. Your land is worth nothing. It's destroyed. It's going to cost you $100,000 just to repair it. How about Dougicus, Doug, is willing to pay you $100,000 for your land? It's a fair price. Oh, yeah, it's a fair price. It's, he's not screwing anybody over. He's paying fair, but, he's trying to help you out. But he'd like to buy your land. What am I going to do? If I try to repair my property, I can, and I can go into debt to do it. But what's the problem? Lots of people are going to say yes to that offer. It's a good price. He's not screwing people. He's not saying, oh, I'll pay you $5,000, way below price. No. Everybody's Roman here. Everyone knows what had happened. It's a fair price. No one's getting screwed. But if I say, no, thank you, I'm going to rebuild. I'm going to be an honorable man. Well, my other neighbors are going to take that money because it's easier to take that money. It's the smart move to take that money. And now, instead of being one farm of 100 acres or 50 acres, surrounded by other farms of 50 acres, one farm of 50 acres surrounded by a plantation of 5,000 acres. With 5,000 slaves on it. So now you got cheaper competition. Now the milk, my sheep, my wool, my chicken eggs, I have to sell at a higher price. Why? Because I have to make the money back on the money I needed to borrow to recover. Meanwhile, the patrician lord has all of these slaves doing the work for him for free. Now, the slaves weren't free, but he could just murder them and get more slaves. He could hire the slaves. He has to maintain them. He has to feed them. But their labor, he gets all the profit. And so that's cheaper competition. He could sell his chicken eggs way cheaper. So who sells them at the market? He does. I don't. And so what happens? Now he'll come back. Kristoff, looks like your farm's not working out so well. Well, I'm trying. It's a little tough. I have the debt. I have the bank. I got stuff. Look, your neighbor, your patrician Lord Dougicus, he understands. He respects you. You tried really hard, but it's not working. He's willing to buy your property for $50,000. plus whatever the lien is, whatever the debt is. He'll cover your debt. Your debt plus 50 grand. He offered 100 grand a couple years ago. Yeah, well, that was a couple years ago. Things change. If you wanted 100 grand, you should have said yes then, shouldn't you? And so what happens is, to get out of the debt, to get out of the failing farm, I sell. The plantation gets bigger. The super rich guy gets richer. I have some money to live on, but now now I have no land. I don't own anything. So what do? Well, I'm unemployed. So I go to Rome. I go to a city where I try to get a job. But what's my job? My job is farmer or warrior, soldier. I'm a good soldier, or a farmer. Well, how many farmers are needed in a city? Answer, 0. Okay, I could slaughter some animals. That sucks, but I can. But I can't grow anything in a city. So suddenly my skills from the countryside are useless in Rome. So I'm unemployed. So I have to get a home. I have to get an apartment. So now I have to pay rent, which means I'm not making equity. I don't own the land. I don't own the building. So that 50 grand starts going down and down. I got kids. I got to clothe them. I got to feed them. I got to send them to school. If I want them to do really well, I got to send them to school with some Greek tutor. I conquered the Greeks, and now the Greek guy I conquered is a slave to the super rich guy, and I have to pay the super rich guy to have my kids taught by a Greek teacher who I conquered. That is a lack of dignity. That is a lack of dignitas. 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 It's insulting. And I'm unemployed. And you know what the Roman response is? You know what the Roman response is because you're an American. Get a freaking job. You don't like it? Go somewhere else. Get a job. And so you have all these ex-soldiers, all these ex-unemployed soldiers who know how to do two things, farm and murder people. And they can't do either. And they're being insulted. And then they're dangerous. And so the Senate knows they're dangerous. The Senate looks at these people and goes, holy shnikes, these guys are dangerous. We have to help them out. We'll give them welfare. We'll give them free food. We'll give them free Sicilian food. Remember, I conquered the freaking Sicilians. I defeated Hasdrubal, Hannibal's grandfather. Good. Now I have to get their food for free from some super rich guy who's donating it. And so now I'm on welfare. So I'm unemployed, on welfare. So I have to stand in a line to get my weekly dole of food. Get my sack of grain doled out for the week. And you know what people are doing every time when I'm standing there in a line with other ex-soldiers waiting for our sack of corn, waiting for our sack of wheat? Get a job. Get a job, loser. And so how much dignitas is that? I was a farmer. I defeated Hannibal at Zama. I defeated the Greeks. I conquered Macedon. Damn it. Philip V, I conquered his ass. I charged across that field. His men ran from me. And now I'm getting yelled at to get a job. My house was destroyed. My barn was destroyed. All my animals were dead. I got bought out. My money, my savings is going down. My kids are in a Greek school. And there's a lot of resentment because it wasn't supposed to be this way. And this is very important. You have to understand because this resentment, because the super rich are jacked into the global trade network. They are the globalists, as Steve Bannon would say today. They can get Greek wine and sell it in Spain, and they could get Spanish gold and sell it to buy slaves in Africa and in Gaul, and they could hire Gaulish mercenaries, and they could do all of these things. I can't do any of that. I'm trying to get a job in Rome with no skills other than farming and holding a sword. People know that. Rich people know that. And there are people who knew this is a problem. And these are called the populari, the populists. And the most famous of them is the Gracchi. Gracchi. 2 brothers, the Gracchi. And what they did, and this is why they're called populists, why they're called populari. They're reformers. They were rich. They are members of that super rich group. That's important to understand. They weren't poor people. They were super rich. And they're looking at this going, this is bad. This is bad for Rome. And I can use this. And what they do is they get elected by the people by going around the Senate. Now, anybody could have done this. Anyone could have appealed to the people to popularly elect them. They could have went to the people and said, I will give you. But they didn't, because they stayed within their club. The patricians were all interrelated. They were all connected. And so they didn't want to piss each other off. And so they played by these rules, like the Senate does today. Notice senators always say, my friend. They always refer to the person they can't stand as my friend across the aisle, my friend, the senator from Texas, my friend, right? You have the ability to speak as long as you want in the Senate because we're all friends here. No one would use these rules wrong. We're all friends. We could all agree. And here come the Gracchi, who are senators, who are super rich, who are part of that in club, who are like, we can help the people, and we can get powerful too. We can be more powerful than the Senate, because you know who really runs Rome? The people do. And the Senate is forgetting that. The Senate is used to running things because the people let them run things. And they forgot the way the rules are written. The Senate only advises. The Senate doesn't actually run anything. The people run Rome. The Senate runs it for the people. But what if you can motivate the people? What if you can get the people to demand things of the Senate? What if you could get the people to march on the Senate and demand change? The Senate would have to respond, wouldn't it? And so the populari reformers get elected by going straight to the people. They go around the Senate. This is kind of like Donald Trump, but it's also really like Bernie Sanders. Because Donald Trump is an outsider. He was never a politician. He was a TV star. He was a businessman. He's a hotelier. He's a lot of things, but he was never a politician. Bernie Sanders has been a politician for most of his adult life. He's in the club. And yet he will go to the people and say, this is what we need. Call your elected officials. Elect me. Do these things. And what they promise, what the Gracchi promise, is to return land to unemployed farmers. They go to the people. They go, you're unemployed. And they're like, yes. And they're like, your life sucks. Yes. Remember when you used to own a farm and you could make a living doing that? Yes. We'll give you back that farm. It might not be your farm, but we'll give you back land. And you will go from being unemployed and a negative, because you're going to accept welfare, to being a taxpayer. And the people are like, that's great. That's what I want, because that's dignity. We'll save money on welfare, which is less expense. We don't have to give away the food for free, because these farmers, these new farmers, these unemployed ex-soldiers will be farmers again. They'll be making their own food. It'll save Rome money. And the most important part, dignitas. dignity for everybody. We will make Rome Roman again. But the super rich would have to give up stuff. The first thing they'd have to give up is control of the Senate. They'd have to give up power and allow, quote unquote, the people to have power. Maybe a democracy? Probably not. But this kind of dictatorship by popular fiat. Think FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was elected 4 times to be president. And in 1936 won the biggest landslide ever. So, like, nobody ran for president a 3rd time, much less a 4th time. But the people wanted him. And he's like, the people want me, I'm going to do it. And people called FDR, who was clearly one of our greatest presidents, but also called him a dictator for doing that. He was supposed to give up after his 2nd run, just like Washington did. Because Washington could have been president for life. Washington's the same way. Washington is Cincinnatus. So the rich would have had to have given up power in the Senate. And the second thing, and the thing they really hated, was they'd have to give up land and income. They could still be rich, but not super rich. That land would be broken up. That plantations would be broken up. So they didn't own 5,000 acres. They owned 500 acres. So instead of making 20 times the average income, they made 5 times the average income. They would still be rich, but not super rich. It's the equivalent of what Elizabeth Warren was talking about doing with the wealth tax. Or what the United States actually did during the Great Depression and the Second World War, which was charge everybody over a certain amount of money, 90%. So you had $20 million in the bank, you were rich. Congratulations. But every penny after that $20 million, the government took 90% of it. You got $20 million. You were still rich, but you could never have the billion. You could never have the 10 billion. And you couldn't be Bezos with 100 billion, which is as much as most small countries have. No, you could be a rich man. You couldn't be a country. And that's what the Gracchi wanted. And what is the result? The result is the Senate murdered them. The Senate murdered both of the Gracchis separately, different. Tiberius Gracchus they murdered first, and then his brother, I don't remember his brother's name, a few years later tries to do the same thing. He gets murdered. And so the Senate murders them. Why? Because they didn't want to vote against him. They didn't want to look at the people and say, F you. No. They didn't want the Gracchi to have power because then they would have had to have told the people, we're not giving you stuff. And nobody wanted that. Remember, the people who are unemployed are ex-soldiers. You know what they'll do to a bunch of senators who screw them. So nobody wants that. So they murder the Gracchi. And what does that say? That says, 1, Rome will not reform. It is a message to all the reformers. Don't you even try. If you even try to reform our system, you're dead. We're going to kill you. Don't reform. So Rome can't reform. 2, the super rich are going to stay in charge. And that's going to be bad in the end. And 3, the poor will stay poor. The unemployed without dignity, without dignitas. And this equals the breakdown of the Republic's values. Remember the Republic's values. We all own this. It's our thing. The Cosa Nostra, which is the name for the Italian mafia, but it's our thing. The Republic is owned by the Romans. It's your thing. We're all in this together. We all sacrifice. Remember the army. The patricians and the plebeians are in the army together. We are all in this. Well, now not anymore. Now it's I'm super rich, and I don't give a damn about you. I don't have to. I don't even live in Rome anymore. I live out in the countryside on my giant plantation. Who cares? Who forkin' cares? Well, turns out the super rich do care. Because the thing is, the super rich still want auctoritas. They're not about, they might live in the countryside now. They might not live in Rome and live with the poor people next door to them anymore, but they still want to be the authority. They still want to be taken seriously. They still want to walk into the Senate and have everyone be like, ooh, Kristoffus, this Kristoffus. And for that, you need glory. Scipio Africanus proved that the people who are the coolest cats in the neighborhood are those who win wars. You want to be awesome? You want to get glory? You need to win a war. Well, what if you don't have any wars? Then you don't need any soldiers. And if everybody wants to win glory and everyone needs glory for auctoritas, the Senate isn't going to give anybody the army. The Senate isn't going to say, oh, you have the army, go win glory and be famous. No. It's going to say no. And so what the super rich have is money. What the unemployed ex-soldiers need is money, but more important, dignity, dignitas. And so what you get is private armies fighting private wars and an army becoming loyal to an individual, not to Rome. So how does this work? We will destroy the Roman Republic in a conversation. I'm sorry, it's only me. I wish we could be more. In class, we would be more. Knock on the door. Oi! Hey! Kristoff! Is this the House of Christoph? Kristoffus? Yeah. What do you want? I am, with, I don't know. Alexandros. Local patrician lord. Super rich guy. You have probably seen him in the Senate. Yeah, he's a piece of work. Kristoffus? You taking a look around his house, his apartment, are living in a shithole. Yeah, I know. Thanks for reminding me. Oh, were those your kids outside? Yeah, sure. The ones without any shoes on? Yeah, those were probably mine. Those dirtbags. Yeah, well, they said the big fat loser was up here when I asked for you. Well, here I am. Well, I'm really surprised because all of my information here, going through my paperwork, was that you were a great soldier. You were victor at Zama. You were awarded 6 medals for bravery and a Gold Eagle citation. Oh, yeah. I hocked them because I needed money to eat. Kids needed shots. The daughter had a tooth that needed to be pulled. You know how much that cost? Yeah, it was a citation. I don't mean to be insulting, but, was that your wife making out with the butcher downstairs in the plaza? Oh, yeah, her? Yeah, probably. You know, the butcher has a job. I sit on the couch all day. I got nothing. Oh, well, I have to stand in line for the wheat every week. But, yeah, she's impressed by the butcher's job. Butcher. Freaking job. Well, I gotta ask. the patrician Lord Alexandros. Oh no, let's call him Alexandros is Alexander. Marcus. The patrician Lord Marcus. He wants to hire you. See, he's going east. He's going to go fight some Parthians, some Armenians. He needs men who have good reputations, and I was told you were one of them. So he wants to hire you as a centurion. He wants you to be an officer. He's going to pay you $50,000 a year. We'll fit you out. We'll get you a uniform. We'll put the officer stripes on your shoulders. We'll get you a helmet. We'll get you a sword. We'll get you a shield. You also get 1% of whatever's conquered. And you know how rich those Armenians are. It's not easy. We'll be gone in 2 or 3 years. But when you come back, you'll have a nice little nest egg. What do you say? Where do I sign? Well, not that fast. I'm glad you're interested. But I gotta ask. Marcus has some problems in the Senate. He's got some enemies who don't like him. And they might cause problems when he comes back. So when we come back, me, you, him together, and he's got problems in the Senate, it's some of these losers who have never fought a battle, who own 5,000 acres out in the countryside, who don't even live in Rome anymore. He's got a question. Do you have his back? Because if you've got his back, he'd love to have you. But if you've got any problems, well, then we might have to renegotiate the situation. Let me get this straight. He's going to make me an officer. He's going to pay me $50,000 a year. He is going to give me respect, responsibility, and a percentage of our winnings. And all I have to do is follow him to Armenia, beat up some people I don't like, then come back. And if he's got a problem with other people I don't like, have his back? Where do I sign? And that's it. We just destroyed the Republic. Why? Because who is Kristoff now loyal to? Not the Senate, not to Rome, but to Marcus, to an individual who is paying his share. And why would he? Not because of the money. Because of the dignity. Because of the dignitas. Because think about it. That's why I set it up with you live in a shithole. That's why I set it up with your kids don't respect you. That's why I set it up with your wife is having an affair with a guy who has a job. That's his big thing. It's not that he's sexy. It's not he's smart. It's not that he's anything. He just has a job. So he's got a future. Well, now what happens? A bunch of Marcus's slaves shows up. Hey, kids, look at this. Look at your old man. And you put on your officer's uniform. You put on your leather chest armor. You put on your helmet. You put on your officer's shoulders. Your cloak. Your sword. What do you think your kids are saying now? Dad's a loser? No. They're calling their friends up. Hey, Joey, look at my dad. Your dad's a butcher. He sucks. My dad's an officer. My dad is awesome. Look at my dad. Who do I get to marry my daughter to now? Some loser? The butcher's son? The cobbler's son? The guy who makes shoes? No. I'm an officer. My daughter is now a hot commodity. Upper middle class families, professors are going to want to marry my daughter. Other officers are going to want their sons to marry my daughter. Up and comers, up and movers. What does my wife think? My wife is telling all of her friends, your husbands are losers. My husband's a man. My husband's going to go east. He's going to conquer the Armenians. He's going to bring back money to me, his wife. And we're going to be awesome. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. And who do I owe it all to? Not to Rome, not to the Senate, but to an individual, to a super rich Marcus. He's given me dignity. He's giving me respect of my children. He's giving me the respect and loyalty of my wife. He's making my life better. No one says, get a job now. They all step aside. Officer coming. When I show up, the men drop their shields. Salute. I'm a man of respect. And when we get into battles and other officers get killed, I move up in the ranks. So I may start at the lowest level, but I'm going to end a captain. I'm going to end a colonel. I'm going to end something higher. And here's the problem. You have private armies, one in Spain, one in the East, one in Africa, one in France, banging away, conquering, extending the empire, conquering barbarians. Well, what happens when two people come back to Rome who both want to be number one? You have civil war because there can't be more than one number one. There can only be one. And so what happens is 100 years of civil war. You get Marius versus Sulla. Sulla will win, and then he will unleash terror against his enemies. All those people who fought against him, all those people who supported Marius, he's now going to murder them. He's going to take their money, and he's going to give it to his troops. So if I was in Sulla's army, not only am I moving up in ranks, I'm getting materially rewarded for murdering, for hunting down and murdering fellow Romans who are traitors. Well, Sulla will die. And there'll be a peace, and the Senate will come back a little bit. And then there will be Caesar versus Pompey. Caesar, the young upstart. Pompey, the old school. Caesar will win. He'll defeat Pompey. Pompey will flee to Egypt, where he'll be murdered by Ptolemy the 13th or so, the younger brother of Cleopatra. Caesar then gets murdered by the Senate because Caesar, as scary as Sulla was not a senator. He wasn't part of that super rich group when he starts. So he always still wants their respect. Caesar, on the other hand, is old school, old money. So he's going to take over. F these people. I'm taking over. And he gets murdered by the Senate. Now, he gets murdered by Brutus. And this is all great stories that I know this has taken a long time. But this is a great story because you have to understand Brutus. Because Brutus gets pooped on in history. And he shouldn't. Because Brutus is in an unbelievable space. One, Brutus is the son of Caesar's girlfriend. Now, Caesar's married, but he has no kids. And he's got a mistress, a long time relationship with her. And that's Brutus's mom. Now, Brutus's family is the oldest, literally the oldest. They're the Washingtons. They are the oldest family of Rome. Because Brutus is the descendant of Lucius Brutus, the kingslayer, the king killer, the founder of the Roman Republic. See, for 100 years, Rome was owned by the Etruscans, if you remember back. And then there's a revolt against the Etruscan kings. Who led that revolt? Brutus. And for 500 years, the Bruti, the family of Brutus, were defenders of the Republic. And then it comes to this guy, this young man, and he's looking at what is the equivalent of a stepdad wanting to destroy the Republic and become a king. What does he do? This is Shakespearean, and it's literally Shakespearean. The E tu Brute. Where does Brutus decide? Does he side with this stepdad, this man he admires, this man who he has known since he was a little boy? Or does he side with the history of his family? That oppressive responsibility to hold up the republic for which his father stood, for which his father gave everything to found. Brutus, Brutus, is in this impossible situation. What does he do? And he chose his family's history against the usurper, against the wannabe king. And he helped murder Caesar. And that's the E tu Brute. And you, I expected it from these losers. But you, Brutus? And the answer is, of course it has to be Brutus. It has to be Brutus. Just like the person who betrays Jesus has to be Judas. It can't be John the Beloved. It can't be Thomas. It has to be Judas, the one who believes the most, who wants the revolution. This is why Dante puts them in hell, in the last circle of hell, together with Satan, who is the only one who could revolt against God. You have to remember who Satan is. Satan is Lucifer. Lucifer means light. Lucifer is the first creation, the first angel, the first thing God says when he creates the universe according to the Torah is, let there be light. And in that moment, he creates Lucifer, the perfect angel, the perfect archangel. So it has to be him who rebels against God. It has to be Judas, the revolutionary, who rebels against Jesus. And it has to be Brutus. It always had to be Brutus. No one else had the history. No one else had the weight of history. It had to be Brutus. So for Caesar to be, and you, is to call on, but I loved you as a son. And to call on that family connection. But Brutus, as he stabs him in the gut, is, but I'm a Brutus. You're not. So what happens next? What happens is the thing no one expected. Caesar's army doesn't desert Caesar. It doesn't break apart. It doesn't become loyal to the Republic again, like Sulla's army did. Caesar's army stays loyal to Caesar, not to Brutus, not to the Republic, not to the Senate. So the question is, who? Who will it give its new loyalty to? And that question is Octavian or Marc Anthony. Octavian is Caesar's blood relative, his nephew, his only male heir. Now, Caesar had a daughter. Caesar married his daughter to Pompey. so that they would be allies forever and best friends. Because the Caesar and Pompey thing is a weird relationship of being best friends with like your older brother or your older cousin. They're friends, but Pompey is older. And Caesar's that next generation, but Caesar marries his daughter to Pompey to be allies. And Caesar's daughter Julia dies in childbirth, giving birth to Pompey's child. And that breaks the two apart. Without Julia to hold them together, they will ultimately go to fight each other. So Octavian is the nephew of Caesar. Caesar had no sons. So he's the heir. He's the heir of the family. But he's like 18. He's 20. He's nothing. He's never won a giant battle. He's never been a military leader. And if you're the army, yeah, Caesar's blood relative matters, because Octavian says, I will honor all of the things my uncle said to you, all of his promises. I will honor them all. I have his money. I will honor them. I will honor his memory. But if you're a soldier and you know a fight is coming, do you want to be led by a 20-year-old with no military experience? That's a tough one, man. That's a tough one. The other is Marc Anthony. Now, Marc Anthony is not a super rich guy. He is Caesar's #1 commander, his lieutenant, his right-hand man, his Alexander Hamilton. At all of his great battles, there is Marc Anthony next to him, next to Caesar. Marc Anthony is still a young man. 30s, 40s. Still a young man. But older than Octavian. But a lieutenant. A military man. A popular man. Popular with the troops. And so what happens is that army cracks. It cracks in two. One group will go with Octavian, and the other group will go with Marc Anthony. And Marc Anthony is a smart choice. If you know Octavian and Anthony are going to fight each other, you know you want to be on the side of the guy who knows how to fight. That's what you need. So, that was a smart choice. But then Marc Anthony went to Egypt. He was going to go fight the Parthians. He was going to go win the great battle in the east. And he fell in love with Cleopatra. And what we really need, and I don't have the time to tell you, is the story of just how awesome Cleopatra is. Because Cleopatra wants her kingdom of Egypt. She is a descendant of Alexander's friend, companion, and general, Ptolemy. She is 200 years related to that. Her ancestor rode with Alexander. She is Greek. She's not Egyptian. She's not African. She is Greek. She's a white girl. But she speaks African dialects. She speaks Egyptian. She is polished. She is a god. She is awesome. And when Marc Anthony meets her, he has never met a woman like her in all of his life. There are no women in Rome like Cleopatra. None. In fact, Caesar does this too. She seduces Caesar. She seduces Marc Anthony. She'll try to seduce Octavian. But Marc Anthony falls in love with Cleopatra. And Marc Anthony liked being a god because Cleopatra was a god. And if you're the lover or husband of a god, you get to be a god too. And Marc Anthony loved that a lot. And Octavian starts going, look at Marc Anthony, look at Marc Anthony, look at Marc. He's not Roman anymore. He's Egyptian. Look at Marc Anthony. He thinks he's a god. He's going to come to Rome and he's going to make us all slaves like the Egyptians. And he used racism. Well, we would call it racism today. It was a culturalism, but he would call it a racism. But we would call it a racism. And they fight. Ultimately, they fight. A lot of that army that had originally gone to Marc Anthony kind of gets creeped out by his kind of Egyptianism. And what happens is they fight a battle, and Octavian wins. And he is the last man standing. There is no one in the Senate who wants to fight him. What happened is, during that period between Caesar and Pompey's war, after Caesar gets murdered and Octavian and Marc Anthony fight each other, Octavian and Marc Anthony join to fight Brutus, and they'll eventually kill Brutus and the other revolutionaries, Cato, Cato. They'll defeat the other revolutionaries. And so then they rule together. There's actually a third guy who ruled, but they got rid of him. He was a whatever. They didn't really need him because they had Caesar's army. This magnificent, well-trained, highly polished army. And so Octavian and Marc Anthony fight. Octavian wins. Cleopatra will commit suicide. In fact, she'll fake committing suicide in order for Marc Anthony to commit suicide. Marc Anthony commits suicide, and then Cleopatra hears that Marc Anthony commits suicide. Then she writes to Octavian, "Hey, Octavian, how about, I loved your uncle. I loved your competitor. I'm sure you're better than both of them. How about you come to Egypt, and we'll take a trip up the Nile. It'll be very romantic." And Octavian's like, "F you," and he sends hit squads after her. So what is she supposed to do? So before the hit squads find her, she commits suicide too. And the last place in the Mediterranean world to be free of the Romans, Egypt, the oldest kingdom, the richest kingdom, the last part of Alexander's conquests to be free, falls with the death of Cleopatra. Octavian conquers Egypt. Octavian conquers the world. He's defeated the enemies of Caesar. He's defeated Marc Antony, Caesar's greatest lieutenant. And he is the last man standing. And he will form the Roman Empire. Thank you.